Listen closely to this story, because what began as laughter on American warships ended as screams echoing across the Pacific. In late 1944, as the United States Navy advanced toward the Philippines, confidence filled the steel decks of its fleets. The enemy had been pushed back island by island, carrier by carrier. Japanese pilots were dying faster than they could be replaced, fuel was scarce, and American air superiority seemed absolute. So when whispers spread about a new Japanese tactic, pilots deliberately crashing their planes into ships, many American sailors laughed it off. They called it propaganda. They said it was fear talk. No trained pilot, no matter how desperate, would willingly turn himself into a human bomb. That belief would die in fire. The reports used a strange word, kamikaze, meaning divine wind. Intelligence officers explained that Japan was organizing special attack units, young pilots trained not to return. On mess decks, sailors joked about it. Some said the Japanese were bluffing. Others said it was a last gasp from a defeated enemy trying to scare rookies. The war had already hardened these men. They had survived Pearl Harbor's shadow, Guadalcanal's chaos, and the grinding battles of the Central Pacific. Compared to torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs, a suicide plane sounded almost theatrical. The ocean was wide. The anti-aircraft guns were many. What could one man in one plane really do? Then came October 25, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. American escort carriers and destroyers were operating off Samar, believing the worst threats were already behind them. The sky that morning looked no different from any other combat day. Radar contacts appeared, Japanese aircraft approaching, gunners took their positions calmly, fighters moved to intercept. Everything followed routine, until something changed. One Japanese plane broke formation. Instead of pulling away under fire, it came lower. Instead of evading, it aimed directly at an American ship. On the deck of the USS St. Lo, sailors watched in confusion as the aircraft absorbed hits and kept coming. Smoke poured from its engine, parts tore away, yet the pilot did not pull up. He did not bail out. He did not hesitate. Seconds later, the plane slammed into the flight deck. The explosion ripped through the ship, igniting fuel and ammunition below. Within minutes, the USS St. Lo was gone, becoming the first American ship sunk by a kamikaze attack. The laughter stopped. The jokes vanished. What remained was shock. Word spread across the fleet with terrifying speed. This was not an accident. This was not desperation. This was deliberate. Japanese pilots were no longer trying to survive the mission. They were the weapon. For American sailors trained to expect enemies who wanted to live, this was something entirely new. Anti-aircraft doctrine suddenly felt outdated. You could scare off a pilot who wanted to return home. You could not scare off a man who had already accepted death. As the days passed, the attacks multiplied. Kamikaze aircraft came in low, weaving through gunfire, sometimes flying so close sailors could see the pilot's face. They aimed for carriers, battleships, destroyers, anything that floated. When they hit, the damage was catastrophic. Fuel, bombs, and wreckage tore through decks and bulkheads. Fires raged out of control. Ships survived that should have sunk, and sank that should have survived. Sailors spoke of the sound first, the engine screaming louder as the plane accelerated toward impact, then the explosion, then the silence broken by fire alarms and screams. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical damage. Every radar contact became a threat. Every incoming aircraft raised the same question: will he pull away or will he aim straight at us? Men slept in their clothes, helmets nearby. Gunners stayed at their stations longer, hands shaking, eyes burning. There was no relief in driving the enemy off, because the enemy was not trying to escape. Victory now meant stopping a man who did not care if he died. American commanders adapted quickly, but the cost was high. New defensive formations were developed. Combat air patrols were pushed farther out. Radar picket ships were stationed ahead of the fleet, acting as sacrificial shields to provide early warning.
Many of those destroyers paid a terrible price. Sailors knew their assignment meant they would see the kamikazes first and face them alone. Courage took on a new meaning in the Pacific. For the Japanese, the kamikaze represented a final, tragic calculation. Lacking ships, fuel, and experienced pilots, they chose to trade lives for damage, hoping to slow the American advance and force a negotiated peace. Young men, some barely trained, wrote farewell letters and climbed into aircraft they knew would never return. It was not madness, it was strategy born of desperation. But for the Americans on the receiving end, it felt like the war itself had crossed a line. By the time the Philippines campaign ended, hundreds of ships were damaged and dozens sunk by kamikaze attacks. Thousands of sailors were dead or wounded. The United States Navy remained dominant, but it was no longer untouched. The ocean had learned to scream. The sea, once seen as a vast shield, now felt like an open grave waiting for fire to fall from the sky. What began as a rumor, something laughed at over coffee and cigarettes, became one of the most feared weapons of the Pacific War. The kamikaze did not change the outcome of World War II, but it changed the men who faced it. It stripped away any remaining illusion that the enemy was finished or that victory would come without further sacrifice. From that moment on, every American sailor understood one brutal truth. In this war, the enemy was no longer trying to survive, and that made him more dangerous than ever.